Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to all of you viewers. Stephen McKenzie, who was the first one to log in this morning, Brother Ogawa, M. Jewel, Robin, Loud to Zoo, and Gloria Briscoe. Greetings to all of you. This is going to be another show that's an extension of one done week before last, which was entitled The Little Study 10,000-Year Ancient Pre-Dynastic Roots of Kemet or Egypt. Ogawa was saying, look at those threads. I decided to wear royal blue today because we're dealing with pharaohship. And so I decided to put on royal blue that's symbolic of leadership. That's observational of you, Brother Ogawa. To society commentary, greetings to you. Last week, we had a very important show on Haiti, and we had a Haitian activist, Brother Pierre, who's been active on the Haiti front, fighting for justice abroad. He's a person who's from Haiti. And so we got some current insights into what's going on in Haiti right now. There's a lot more, but we'll, over time, we're going to cover that. And what you're going to see happening this year is I'll be bringing in experts on current events in Africa. So we can be updated on that, because the purpose of this show is to apply your past to your present, to transform it so you can move from injustice and oppression to justice. And a lot going on in Africa that we need to know about. And you always, as a African, wherever you are in the world, especially if it's outside Africa, you need one foot in your reality and the other one in the African reality, whether it is Africa or the Caribbean or South America or Europe or the South Pacific, or Africans in Asia, wherever we are in the world. So this show is about that. And I thought that you got some very interesting insights from Pierre on a lot of things that are not generally covered in writings on Haiti, one of which is the role of Haitian women, and showing that they were among the fierce fighters of Haiti, and they were the fiercest. And then he also told you that Toussaint's best general, Dessalines, who was a true revolutionary, he was trained by 2 African warrior women. And they were not working in a slave kingdom, as this film that you recently had, raised up deliberately by the filmmakers. They said, we knew that this civilization engaged in slavery. That's why we wanted to raise it up and then try and present that as heroic. When African women, because of the basis for just societies, which is male-female empowerment, it dictated that women would be taking part in everything, not on the same level as men when it came to warriorhood, but those that wanted to could, as it was true of education and everything else, because these societies come out of balance. So there were a lot of interesting things brought out in that presentation. And the Haitian people are really being messed over by this government, by the Western world, and too many powers on earth. And we need to give them support. So that was the point of having Pierre Lebossiere on to discuss that. And so you should be following Haiti and give them support. And he gave you a site to go to where you can tune in to meetings on Haiti and also provide material support to them. They need it. So the last show 2 weeks ago on the little study, 10,000 year ancient pre-dynastic roots of dynastic Kemet, that was focusing on a subject that is generally not addressed deeply by African historians as well as European, but I'm not interested in them. And so usually the focus is on dynastic Kemet starting at 31, 32, 3300 BC. And that's important. And there's a lot of information on dynastic Kemet. There's a lot more we need to discover. But all the elements of dynastic Kemet, which is unified in that 31, 32, or 3300 BC, all of them except pyramid building had been formed in the ancient period, going back 10,000 BC. So, as I pointed out before, John Henry Clark, Asa Hilliard, and others, we would have discussions on what was the greatest period of Kemetic civilization. The majority of people focused on the 18th dynasty because that's the period of power, where Kemet is now engaged in what Sheikh Anta Diop called defensive imperialism. They had been invaded by the Hyksos, and so what they then did after throwing them out, because they occupied northeastern Kemet for 150 years, the Kemites carried out attacks in Palestine, the place where they came from. But they didn't set up permanent colonies. But that was the period of defensive imperialism. And then some would talk about the 25th dynasty that John Henry Clark characterized as Kemet's last walk in the sun, where blacks were still ruled by Ethiopians, Pianki and others. I always said I don't know how you can say that. Everything was created in what I call the period of the Anu, or the great ones. I've renamed this period, but I'm using the name that the people gave themselves. I'm not inventing this. If you ask them, I'm almost certain that's what they would have called their period. The historical period of the great ones, and what great achievements they made. The highest level of civilization, particularly on the level of technological achievements, because the Chua innovated a lot of things in the technological areas, but they had the highest achievement in terms of civilization, which is the real definition of civilization. And I reject the idea that you can find the definition of civilization to ones that are urbanized. And for the West, generally killer cults, warlike societies. And that for them, the only basis for civilization is stratified societies. And here we'll be dealing with a stratified society. That is levels of structure, kings, priests, farmers, artisans, a host of others. But civilization is much more than that. And when I put out my book, which will be my 9th book, which I'm doing research now on I don't have a title for it now, but it'll be dealing with the Chua Foundations for World History, where I cover the history of the whole world, and it's a whole new perspective. If you read the book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, I lay the foundation for that. I give you the perspective for a new framework for world history. And it's when you put the Chua into the picture that you have that new framework. They've been left out. And they had the largest civilization in world history. They're the world's first people. They were everywhere. So I don't think that the notion of civilization can be limited to, or primarily based upon stratified societies, and in the case of the West, warrior societies. And that's generally what they do. They take their standard and impose it on everyone else. In fact, you could question whether these societies were civilized, certainly in the treatment of people. Oh, I see Lawrence Freelo. Right on, Lawrence. Where are you at? Are you back in the U.S.? Or are you still in Asia? Put that up and let me know. Lawrence is a former student of mine, and he's the one that's got a lot of this stuff going here under the bottom of the screen, and done a lot of this stuff along with Brother Ugawa. And Ugawa has been working his butt off for this show. So Kemet certainly not only fits the description of civilization, but the highest civilization that the world has ever seen when it comes to technical achievements, and a very high level when it comes to civil behavior and civil society, though nowhere near as high as the Kemites. And as I've already demonstrated, Kemetic civilization's origin is owed to them, the Anu Ausar. And somebody, I don't know if it's sinking in yet, at the end of the show, they said, oh, Shaka said the Anu Ausar. Well, you see that guy right there with that little staff? What is he? He's Twa. Those 3 registers up there that I've discussed before means great ones. And with his left foot forward, and I'll talk about this staff of authority later, he's a governor of a UO, U-O, which means a state, like California and Kemet. And they spread all over northern and southern Kemet in the ancient period. Starting around 10,000 BC. They didn't have it set up at that time, but that's their beginning. Jop and Theophilo Benger presented this as the best proof of the Black origin of Pharaonic Kemet. We're going to be talking about the Pharaonic system today. And so look, but all they cared about was he's Black. Well, he's clearly Black. But This little guy who's Anu, A-N-U, he's a Chwa, little guy. You see him? Huh? And this is also Meta-Netra script. And in Abinga's interpretation, he's come to the palace and the temple of Hamen to worship the god, the one with the two ears on the side there. That's Set, because in pre-dynastic Kemet, or the period of the great ones, Set was the netter for Pharaoh. In the dynastic period, Horus is, So if you're going to understand the civilization of Kemet, you better understand the civilization of the Chwa that translate into Anu in the period of the great ones going back 10,000 BC. So this is extremely important. So Kemet is the greatest achievement in ancient civilization in the history of the world when it comes to the technical achievements, as well as a high order of morality, though not nearly as high as their ancestors, the Chwa. But they get that high level of truth and justice from them. And then, of course, that's the standard throughout the world and throughout Africa. And guess what? That's the standard today. What is it your mother teaches you that is the most important thing? Don't lie. Tell the truth. And what's the most important thing that a mother can say about her child? I'm talking about a Black mother anywhere in the world. That person is a good person. My son, my daughter, they're good people, knowing all their faults and everything else. You know what I mean? So that's an African heritage. So African mothers globally most of them have not heard the word Ma'at, M-A-A-T, truth, justice, right order, so forth. That's what they teach. It's a part of their makeup. It's rooted in practice. You know what I mean? Some of us are moving away from that right now. Some of us are becoming as crooked as pretzels. And that's due to the societies we're living in and choices we make. And that's part of what this show's about. Look at the past to see how you can draw from it to straighten things out in the societies in which you live today. So this show 2 weeks ago was highlighting key features of the foundation civilization, the Anu, the civilization of the great ones. And it focused on things like their foundation. And you're not going to hear this in any book on Kemet. You're not going to hear this, the twinlineal foundations of Kemet. Because basically Ma'at is about male-female balance. That's what Ma'at is. And if you hear someone like Obinga talk about dynastic Kemet, and he's the foremost authority now on dynastic Kemet, that is the thing that will come out of his mouth with most passion. That key to Kemet was the groundation or foundation in male-female balance. Now, they came nowhere near to what the Chwa had, because when you choose stratified societies, they become complex, then that may be your goal, but it may not always be achieved. But the point is, that was the overriding drive of this civilization, and key reason that it had such great wisdom, and a key reason that it lasted so long. And in this overview on the 10,000 year period of Kemetic civilization of the great ones, and what they gave to dynastic Kemet, there was, of course, what I stressed many times before, that not only did the dynastic people inherit from the Anu, who were agrarian Chwa, who founded the ancient period before them, all the elements of civilization, but key to that was this philosophical orientation called Ma'at, harmony, truth, justice, right order. And I pointed out before that the Chwa give birth to that in practice, first of all. They all lived it. But secondly, in concept. And so the root of Ma'at is Masouri, Maasouri, a Chwa word that means straight, upright, and just. And as I pointed out before, I'm not a linguist, so I always run this past the linguist, and I told Obenga this, and he said, yeah, he ain't got no problem with that. See, Obenga, as well as Diop and others, did not make the mistake of just focusing on Kemet. They understood that Kemet was a part of Africa. And since Diop is coming from Senegal and Obenga is coming from a place now called Congo-Brazzaville, close to where the second oldest group of Chwa come from, the Biaka Chwa, they would both have a special interest in showing the linkage between Inner Africa and Kemet, And so Sheikh Anta Diop would go into the language spoken by his people to show a kinship with the Kemetic language. And Obenga would do that because he's a linguist, as well as other cultural aspects of African civilizations as they apply to Kemet. And I'll be doing that today in discussing the role of Osiris or Ausar, the correct name, and the role of Osiris and Ausar and most ancient priesthood of Anu in creating Kemetic civilization. So today it's going to focus heavily on the pharaohship of Kemet and particularly in the creation of the Pharaonic civilization. So this was part of what was covered in the first piece that we went into 2 weeks ago. Now, one of the things that I did in this first presentation was use an approach to history that very few historians use, and that was to link history to astronomy and astrology. And the reason I did that is, of course, I'm an astronomer. I'm an amateur astronomer. I'm not really an astronomer. I study enough to know something about it. But I'm an astrologer, historical and personal. And as a historian, I'm into cycles. And so I'm not into this linear stuff that the European has, ancient, medieval, modern. History doesn't follow a straight line. It zigs and zags. Your life doesn't follow a straight line. As the spiritual says, sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. And sometimes the downs are the basis for rising up. We should know about that. You know what I mean? So, so for me, cycles are very important. So I don't have this tragic view. Oh, there are cycles of rise and decline. Just like there's a cycle of birth, and then you go through the various stages of life, and you reach old age and eventually death. And then there's a rebirth to a new life, which we'll focus on today, which is the essence of what Ausar means, life, death, and rebirth. We'll come back to that. So that Kemet could last 10,000 years and then finally go down. And for any of us to then take the position of, well, they're down, we can't use that. Take the the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's position that I hate myself because they kicked us in the behind, white people. Why should you hate yourself for that? You know what I mean? I'm not saying you should hate anybody. I mean, if there's anybody you should be mad at, it's the people that put you down. But guess what? The word slave comes from Slavic, and white people were the first ones to go down on the ground. And you don't see them running around saying they're ex-slaves, ex-Slavic. But we got black people running around saying I'm an ex-slave. Like that's all you ever did. Well, that's all you know, and you don't even know the truth of that. But people who have been around as long as 200,000 years, according to mitochondrial DNA, 149,000, which would be 159,000. Some historical finds suggest 200,000. How in the holy hell do you restrict yourself to a 400-year period? And then that becomes the focal point of your identity. And I know I'm not talking to y'all who are listening. And by the way, Cecilia Maria Flanders, lovely to have you from London. I spent a good 40, 45 years organizing in the UK and doing work around African Liberation Day with the Pan-African Congress movement that is still doing work there and with other Africans. And my books are distributed in London and throughout the UK. So it's very glad to have you watching this. And Shonda Henderson, not only one of our loyal supporters, and LaShonda Henderson, someone who puts her mouth where her money is. And that would surely help on this show. You know what I mean? I appreciate that. So part of the reason for looking at this ancient period is of course, it's a great thing. What boxer would fail to look at Muhammad Ali, who said, I am the greatest, even before he was? And it's debatable if he was. As I pointed out before, Sugar Ray Robinson tends to get the write-up for being the greatest boxer who Muhammad Ali based his style after. But whether he was or not, he was great, but greater in character, even though one of the viewers of this show pointed out his flaws. He had them. And that's what really made him great. And that's what made Kemet great. And that's what makes you great. When you leave this earth, you're not taking nothing but your character and not your reputation, because that can be gossip, chit chat, chatter. But what you actually did, that's all you leave. And that is the essence of what is important in life. So the Kemites had this high level of civilization. And they went through a number of cycles, starting with the ancient period. And so the processional cycles that I covered in the last show under precession of the equinoxes, that's the great cycle of history, going back close to 26,000 years, one complete circuit through 12 zodiacal signs of 2,100 years each. So I went through that, and I hope you got a point. There's a hell of a correspondence between what the symbols suggest for a particular time and what was going on Earth at the same time in Kemet, in this particular case. I started with the 10,000 BC period, the precessional cycle, in which the relationship of the Earth to the zodiac was in the precessional sign of Leo, and showed that this was the period in which the Great Sphinx was built. Leo is symbolized by the lion, and the Great Sphinx is a great lion with the face of a human being. And the dynastic Kemites could not figure out how that was built and what happened during that period, because that was so far back from the period of 31, 32, or 3300 BC. And then I went through the precessional cycle of Cancer, which is comparable in Kemet to Khepra, Khepra, the beetle. You see this ring I have on? That's the beetle, right here. That's my netter. So Khepra, the beetle, that represented the sun at sunrise. I'm born at 5 a.m, and the unity of masculine and feminine, and therefore signifying creativity. And so what this was saying is that this period, which is around 7,900 BC, had to be a very creative period in Kemet, as was this ancient period that preceded it at 10,000 BC. And I want to say this, that these were people who had migrated out of the area, the Mountain of the Moon, out of the area Kung, where the Kung people are, Kalahari Desert and other parts, but the Kalahari is in South Africa. They had migrated into Kemet, and they're there during the late Stone Age. And I showed you some pictures the last time on stone artifacts. And then they are there to usher in what's called the Neolithic, Neolithic, or agricultural period. These are Twa. Now, this is a key thing. People who are studying this period are looking at, for example, things that I showed before of artifacts, pottery, in the case of the Stone Age, flint objects that are points, arrow points, and things like that. But they don't really know the culture of the people. And then if you're dealing with somebody like Flinders Petrie, who has been designated the authority on Kemet, he's going to treat everybody as non-African. He's going to bring Europeans into Kemet before they existed as a people, 10,000 BC. He's talking about how there was migrations in there. You know what I mean? Have you studied world history? They weren't even on the scene there. So how could they be there? Or you got people like Hegel, who's the architect of intellectual racism, saying that Kemet was a part of the spirit of Asia and is putting them there before the Asians had created anything that you could call civilization. And how can they be a part of the spirit of anything? You know what I mean? And as Obenga has shown, and Diop and others, the linguistic basis, and we've all shown the cultural basis of Kemet is African. Well, they're African. You know what I mean? So how is it a part of the spirit of something when it's geographically somewhere else? So this is all the mumbo jumbo. So in the show before this, there was the look at that period. But what I'd say about this Kepler period and earlier is this was a very creative period. And even before writing, these Africans who were Twa, who because of their antiquity, their being the first humans on the planet, and because of the nature of their character, piped into higher powers. These were people with paranormal powers. And that's why they could innovate civilization, not just being kind. And that was important. That's at the foundation of civilization. But all kinds of other innovations that I've gone into in 5 series on the Twa and the history of their contribution to world civilization. You should watch it. And then I went into a 3 or 4 part series on the Anu. You should look at those. These are chapters in a book, by the way. Check them out. So if you're going to understand what's going on in this early period, it's very creative. And one of the things that's key to this creativity is the interplay of male and female. And I would say that because during this early period, there was not a central government, it would be even more creative because there's no restraints on what people can do. And so while Pharaonic civilization emerges, and it's a very important contribution that Kemet makes, what we know about the Twa is that they were the most creative people, not just the first people, the most creative people on the planet for a lot of reasons and innovating things on every level. I've talked about a few of them: medicine, physics, astrophysics, the idea of one God, but from a scientific perspective of the totality of forces, a part of which is distributed to everything God's created, right? Force. They make no mistake about calling God a he or a she. You know, they understood God was within them, which is a key concept we'll be looking at today. So when you're looking at this ancient period that could innovate all the elements of dynastic civilization, its most creative period would be in this period. And there's not a huge amount of information on it. And even before they institute writing, they are creating. And note, most of Africa which is oral and not written. Every person, particularly the wise people, are libraries, and the oral culture, as we're going to see, whether a written civilization or not, and we innovated writing in Kemet and in other places, the oral is always most important. And it is reflective of the state of the level of humanity of a people, and therefore their creative powers. So this is this pre-dynastic period. So today the topic is the role of the Anu and Ausar, Osiris, in creating the Pharaonic civilization of Kemet. The role of the Anu and Ausar, which is the correct name that the Greeks called Osiris, in creating the Pharaonic civilization of Kemet. And this is extremely important. So this is going to be the central focus of this discussion. So this show is going to focus on and pay main attention to the central unifying institution of Kemet, the institution of pharaohship or kingship in the ancient historical period, showing how that institution then gives rise to the Pharaonic institution during the dynastic period, 31, 32, and 3300 BC. I see Hire Heka here, Wolf Manlu, Sebrahu, Kusnaga, and others. Greetings. So this is the focus for today's show. I go where other people don't go simply because it'd be a waste of my time and yours to hear what you've already heard. And I build on their stuff. And you'll see I'll be quoting from one of our outstanding scholars today on certain notions of Kemet. I draw on that, use that stuff, but I'm looking at what hasn't been covered in depth, though, as I pointed out a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Finch is getting ready to put out a book on pre-dynastic Kemet. Should be interesting. He's an outstanding scholar, and people should check his stuff out. So this is the main focus here is on the central unifying institution of Kemet, the institution of pharaohship or kingship, and showing how the Anu, particularly Ausar, laid the basis for the dynastic system of pharaohship during the historical period that we know more about, 31, 32, or 3300 BC. All of this coming from the great ones which they acknowledge. And I should note that the oldest priesthood in Kemet was the priesthood of Ani, A-N-I, which is the name for Ausar, or Anu, but it's the name of Ausar, one of his names. And the priest of Ani subsequently would be other priests, but the first priest of Ani was Ausar. And from the name Ani, as Sheikh Anu Diop points out, derives the name Anu, which is normal that a people will base their civilization on their founding ancestor. That's how African people do. So there are important reasons why the institutions of dynastic Kemet, the most striking institution of all of dynastic Kemet, is the institution of pharaohship, and it comes from the ancient ones, the great ones, and particularly it comes from the Anu, the great ones. And it's very important to understand that this institutionship of pharaohship or kingship and the institution of queenship has an African root. Now, the first root of this is Kemet in this ancient period. But we can see that it was drawing from an African mindset, philosophically, culturally, and otherwise, by looking at the institutions of kingship in Inner Africa. So I'll take one, which is the Asante system, Asanta, people from Ghana. A lot of Africans from America come from Ghana. Jamaicans have heavy Ghanaian roots. And they're some of the prettiest people on the planet. You want to talk about fine? My goodness. So the Asante have a system of kingship that I describe as the best man system. The Europeans have a system of kingship, which is called I would call the most vicious man. That's the one who got to be king in Europe, and often in Rome and places like that. And that was true of the Turks and others. And it doesn't mean that they didn't have some just qualities, but it meant that force and violence was key, because that was key to their culture. And you'll see some of us, when we're giving stories on Africa, we're having stories like how a king comes to power by challenging another king in battle. That didn't happen, because we had enough sense to know that while in the period in which there was war, one of the qualities of kingship or pharaohship would be bravery, as was the case among the Asante, or the Yoruba, or the Bambara, or many others. And so one of the qualities you look for if it was a period of warfare, and most of Africa existed outside of a period of warfare, was that they were brave on the battlefield, never turned their back on a war party, made sacrifices, put their lives on the line. So that was a quality if it was a period of warriorhood. But the best man system means the best human being. In this case, man. Now, this is an important distinction to make. The queens were never required to display their best female qualities. If you were of the station of queen mother, you were queen mother. You didn't get selected. Except maybe some other sisters might have put you there, but you were not selected according to any criteria that you had to have certain qualities. But the males were. This is tied also to secret societies, where in Africa, there are females in every male secret society, one. There ain't a single male in any female secret society. Females raised you. They got secrets, and you are not going to know them. That's your mama. And so when you have queen mother, in the African sense, she's not your mother. That would be a conflict of interest. So here's the key point. With the Asante Hina Santawa system, the Asante Hina is king in Ghana, and the Asantewa is queen mother. The Asante Hina, the one that is picked, has the qualities of a lineage head. And a lineage head, who is called Opanyan, was once a female. And when war came, they went to two stools, dual stools, one of the king, one of the queen mother. And so when it came time to pick a king, the same qualities required of the lineage head was the quality required of the king. And the council of the kings was made up of lineage heads. So what were those qualities? One that never cursed, one that never lied, one that never abused women, children, or any person, one who was honest, one who was brave, one who never in the course of their life did anything to dishonor them or their people. So this isn't like parliamentary democracy where you can get, some petitions and you can get some money and you can run for office. You had to be the best man, the one with the highest moral qualities, the best human being. That's true among the Yoruba. My name, Oba. I took that because I like the way in which traditional leadership worked. Again, it was the Igboni, which is an institution among the Yoruba, the eldest, most wise woman and man who would make up the Igboni group that would pick the Oba. And the Oba was governed by his council, made up again of highly evolved leaders coming from the villages of Nigeria. And so when it came to picking a Oba, he had to be the best man in those circumstances. He didn't make the final decisions, his council did. And in the case of the Yoruba Oba system, the woman's not on the council, but market women have a big say-so. And if the market women tell you to do something over and over again, then you're going to have a problem. You know what I mean? A big fat problem. So with the Yoruba, if they have a decision, because all decisions were made by consensus of the council, and if the Oba makes a decision on his own and the council is against it, then what will happen is he'll get 3 warnings. And if he doesn't change, he gets a ball with a parrot feather in it, and that means kill yourself. Because we have a system of election and a system of ejection. And so you'll say, oh, that ain't right. Well, I could think of a lot of leaders that need to get that notice. Plenty of them in the United States and all over the world. You hear me? So that's part of what I like about the system in, the Yoruba system. And here I'm showing you this picture that was shown last week of Ausar, who is the founder of Kemet, Anu, and who set the standards for Pharaonic civilization. And he definitely was the best man. That's an actual carving of him. And I gave the proof of that last week. So this is the nature of this system set up in Kemet, but it's throughout Africa. But the founders of Kemet are the first people in the world. And then Kemet is a reflection of African philosophy and African culture. So you see here the picture of the pharaoh Ausar with his 2 symbols of authority across his chest. He was by far the best man, the first pharaoh. And I went into some nuances on this last week. I won't go into them again. But we do know there was an interface between Shepsut, Shepsuts, which the term Hatshepsut is derived from, the female pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. And she was a very prosperous farmer in Kemet, and she interfaced with the pharaoh, giving the views of the women. So again, here, the male-female balance thing of the twin lineal thing that I talk about in Return to the African Mother principle of male and female equality was being adapted to an institution where you have what's called pharaoh, which is a male married to his sister, who, because she's the one that carries royal right. And I might say royal incest ain't good no way you look at it. So there's a compromise being made there. I know people don't like to hear any of this criticism, but it wasn't just Kemet. That occurred in other parts of the world as well. The Chinese, their first emperors married to their sister. That's a prohibition, number 1, you don't do. But there were various reasons for it, mainly that the male could only assume pharaohship through a royal woman. That was the main reason. But the key point is Ausar is in this tradition of best man. And I want you to look at those eyes. That's a very spiritual person there. Very, very spiritual. And if you look at him, if you have any sense for a feeling of people, that's not a being exuding force and violence. That's a peaceful human being right there. Look at him. That's the actual picture of Ausar. This is a Twa person, Anu, great one, whose name Ani, or Ausar is Ani, the priesthood of Ani, derives. He is a man who becomes God. And in the picture that I had here of the Anu, who is going to the palace and the temple of Amen, he's going there to worship the god who's Pharaoh. So this is also a notion common throughout Africa, that Pharaoh is a god on earth. Now, it's also a concept in Africa that God's within all of us. So we all have God within us. But here, this is the great God. Now, Ausar wasn't only the first pharaoh of Kemet, he was the first ancestor. He was not the first ancestor if you're going to go back 10,000 BC. But when it comes to the dynastic system, he's the first ancestor. And this is important because in Africa, wisdom is symbolized by ancestorship. And the first ones are considered to be the source of wisdom because they're the ones closest to God. So again, locating Kemet within the African cultural system among the Bambara, B-A-M-B-A-R-I, who come from Mali, they have what they call a chain of transmission. They're an oral culture. And so when they go back to the source of wisdom, they go back to the first ancestor among their people because they were the closest to God and they transmitted the wisdom that they had from God to human beings. And so in the Bambara educational system, when a person is being educated and their highest level is called Donikiba, that means a creator of knowledge. That in the African American system would be called an innovator. Or if you have an apprentice who's at the very beginning, because in the African system of education, the apprenticeship starts at age 21 and it extends for 21 years. And so when a person is citing authority, he will always say, according to my master, and will cite the master. So when Kemites talked about the source of wisdom, when they have a conversation, I've referred to this before, it's a common knowledge, with Solon, S-O-L-O-N, a Greek wise man who had carried out reforms in Greece, and he comes as a wise man, as an elder, they tell him he's not an elder. The Greeks lack wisdom because they can't go far enough back to tap in to great ancestors. And so the great priest that informed Solon of this traces his system back to 8,000 years, but knows it goes back 10,000. And Ausar is the source of this, the man who becomes God. As Pharaoh, man, God is Pharaoh. And then later, with his passing on to the next life, the God on earth, you know? Ausar is symbolic of this idea of ancestral wisdom that derives from virtuous character. Now, this is the key thing. In the West, wisdom isn't cherished that much. In fact, in the US and places like that, youth is challenged, cherished more than eldership. People are ready to retire you in a minute as soon as you get wise. You know what I mean? And so the value for age and experience, and then what comes out of that is not high, though they have some elders who are advising them. Too many of them that are running the ship don't know what they're doing. And of course, they've been miseducated. My book on Seba is dealing with this. So Ausar is the first ancestor of the dynastic system that I think is around 6500 BC, because there are qualities of Ausar that go back to Shu Tefnut, the processional cycle of Shu Tefnut, which is the cycle of twinness. And I went into this last time, I'm not going into it. Those parallels there were striking. What was going on Earth in terms of twinness. Those of you who didn't see the last series should watch it. And what's, what coincides with that processional cycle. And what I didn't point out the last 2 weeks ago is that Ausar was known as the person in charge of the 2 treasuries, as well as the chief priest of Ani. So Ausar was worshipped after death and was viewed as a god on earth during life, because as they tell you in the stories, he was an innovator of a lot of qualities of civilization. He took a lot of people who were in a rough state and civilized them. And then they say traveled to other parts of the world doing the same thing. And they said he always did it through persuasion, never through force. And he liked to sing, he had a sense of humor. So this institution of pharaohship is striking as the central figure of dynastic Kemet culture, because it is the most distinctive institution that the dynastic people inherit from the great ones, the ancient period that's incorrectly called pre-dynastic Kemet. And this then is the main reason, based on Ausar, the main reason is because it is tied to the best man, best human being tradition. And Ausar represented that. And as I go through the qualities of Ausar that are often not discussed, you'll see why this institution was at least grounded the way it was, and other African institutions like the Asante Hina Santawa, Oba system, and others in Africa were as well. The Anu gave Kemet all the elements of civilization. One of the most important elements they gave is the Book of Coming Forth by Day, misnamed the Book of the Dead, because it was not a Book of the Dead. The idea of coming forth by day was the description of how someone who passed through judgment in the afterlife, when you die, your spirit leaves your body and you pass judgment before 42 assessors. And if you're judged just, then you come forth to the day, meaning you come forth to the light. Your little light shines and you become Ausar, in the sense that every person did that passed judgment. That is, your name, whatever your name is, would be Ausar in your name. And that means that you passed into the heavenly realm. And by the way, parapsychology confirms this. Parapsychology is the study of the spirit realm, because they've always got to have some funny name in the West. These are people who are expert on life after death. And they say the same things that the Kemites say, the Yorubas say, and everyone else says. And of course, one of these is that there is a realm of light. My sister was with my father when he passed. He was a very good man. And nothing but light was shining in that room. Nothing but light. Because when you go to this other realm, it's outside of space and outside of time. And instantly you're going through experiences. And one of the experiences that parapsychology notes, many have noted, is that the Ka, which is your destiny, your double, a spirit that looks just like you, is also your destiny and life force. It is your car that carries the record of your life. And instantaneously, there's a review as you're passing from the physical to the spirit, fully spirit state. There's a review of your whole life, of what you did. That's judgment. And the Kemites would picture it as a hall of 42 assessors, where you said, I did not lie. And it's called the negative confessions, I did not take another man's wife or another woman's husband. I did not steal. I did not murder. I did not instill fear in the hearts of another, which is high level morality. It's a state of mind, not just a physical act, a psychological act that can harm others. And so all of this is happening. So that review, instantaneously, you get to see in milliseconds your effect on other people, positive or negative. And you get a weighing. And when the weighing is done, because I know it wasn't the perfect weighing that people portray it as, is you came out perfect and everything was all right. Everybody's in hell then. So if the balance shows the weighing, and we'll go into this at the end, you'll actually see the pictures on this, then you go to the realm of the light. And if you don't, you go to the other realm. And by the way, there ain't no devil, but that's a whole nother thing. I'm not interested in getting into an argument over it, but that's a Judaic invention, and Christianity and Islam picked it up. And, think about it. There ain't nothing all bad on this earth. And why would God have something like that? There ain't nothing. Everything's got some positive in it. But God rules both realms, that punishing realm and that nice realm. God rules both of them. Which means this afterlife, if it's hell, may not be forever. But it ain't going to be pleasure. You hear me? So that depends on your character. So the Egyptian book of Coming Forth by Day, misnomered the Egyptian book of the dead. The original writings of this have been found in Thebes, Thebes, and it measures 78 feet by 1 foot 3 inches. It's the longest writing script that Kemet has. And it conveys the wisdom of coming forth by day. And it's particularly the wisdom of the priesthood of Ani and the wisdom of Ausar, and what Ausar represents. So what does the great book of Coming Forth by Day say about Kemet's first pharaoh and Africa's first king? What it says about this pharaoh, this human being right here, is very important, because it really speaks to what's essential if you're going to have a good life on earth, if you have a system where you have any kind of leadership at all, and most societies do. So what it says about the first pharaoh describes the qualities necessary for a pharaoh or king who's viewed as an intermediary between heaven and earth. And so at different periods, you would say that the pharaoh was an intermediary between different gods. And at one point, it would be Ausar. At another point, they might say Ra, the sun god. But this notion is key to this idea that pharaoh is king, or king is God, because it's rooted in the earliest practices coming from the Twa. And it is this, that lineage heads in Africa, and this would be true of the ancient period of the Anu as well, lineage heads had the responsibility of communicating with the spirit world. And that meant that they had to have certain qualities. So in the case of Ghana, lineage head opinion was called the first among equals. He didn't make decisions for the lineage, but he made recommendations. But the key thing is, he was a person of pure character. So the person picked had the same qualities of the Asantehena, a just person. Why? Because they had to be as good as possible, as truthful as possible, so they could be conveyors of the spirit. So that you got to understand, in ancient Africa, prosperity was viewed as being based on the ancestral spirits being happy with you. And that was based on you living a good life. And so in the case of the Twa, any people who come after the Twa, I had a series I dealt with how the Twa civilized the Bantu people according to them. And they said that the main thing they did in civilizing them, aside from teaching them not to have incest and everything else, and technological things and how to heal themselves and a whole bunch of other things, is they taught them how to contact the first ancestors who were Twa. And there was a ritual they had to go through, but more important, they had to have certain moral qualities. And so Pharaoh is the intermediary between heaven and earth. And so if people are going to prosper, Pharaoh needs to be just. This was the belief. And there's plenty of us who believe that a lot of stuff that's going on now is based on wrongdoing. People are paying back, you know. So here is the first description of Ausar. Check this one out. He is described in the book of Coming Forth by Day as, quote, the pure one, P-U-R-E, pure one. Look at those eyes right there. Those are spiritual eyes, but those are peaceful eyes. Y'all check out eyes. And this is a carving of him. And this, I pointed out in the last show before last, this is the way they portrayed the images of their great pharaohs, or all their pharaohs and great priests. And look at his eyes. So he's described in the book of Coming Forth by Day as the pure one. Now, remember this. The Twa, the Kung people, the first Twa people, they call themselves the pure ones. You think that's an accident? Now, what's the difference? In the ancient period of maybe 6,500 BC, it is Ausar who's the pure one, and everyone else is struggling to be that. But in the period of the Twa, everyone is. That's because they're the first beings. And being the first beings who have cultivated and continued good practices as human beings, they're closest to God. They're the ones closest to God. And if you know anything about being able to feed into God, those that do are usually good spirits, always. George Washington Carver, I always give the example of him near pure spirit, if not a pure spirit. Greatest scientist in the 20th century, and was constantly communicating with God. Now, I know you all have problems with that, communicating with God. How you can, when you have a dream and that dream proves to be accurate, you are communicating with God. And when you have enough sense to follow it, you're benefiting from that communication. You know what I mean? And so the higher order of creators, they're the ones who, as George Washington Carver would say, think God's thoughts. Einstein was one of those. It ain't just black folks. He probably wasn't a perfect person, but he was a good person, good human being. Theory of relativity came from a dream. The inventor of the periodic table had a dream. He knew chemistry, but the logical mind will not give you whole truths of a part. So the theory of relativity governs time after the Big Bang. No physicist other than him got that, but he didn't invent it. He piped into God's mind and God revealed it. That's how it works. So all you running around here who, because you read a book and it said you can't see God and how can he see God? Remember, I gave you the example of Fool's Crow, the great Lakota holy man who lived to 99 years of age, upright, erect, and healthy until his last day on earth. His astral soul, which is the Ba, the bird with a head, would fly to heaven when God summoned him. He was a great healer. And he also supported the American Indian movement, which was inspired, as the former minister of culture of the Black Panther Party, Emory Douglas, said, was inspired by the Black Panther Party. And he would leave sometimes for 3 and 4 days. Anyone that has astral travel where their spirit leaves their body and they see things knows that happens usually in the dream state, but some people do it when they're awake, but only for a very short period of time, because when the soul leaves the body, if it doesn't come back, you're dead. And most people are not on such a high order that they would either be able to do it physically, but more important, are on a mission in life where God would reward them with face time. And Fool's Crow had that. He had that. He actually went to the highest heaven, the heaven of the lights. And as I pointed this out before, but for people that haven't heard it, I'm going to say it again. He described God as a great white light. I've described my experience with the light. That whole thing about all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. No historian has laid that down, or no person, as the basis for the just societies of Africa. None have. It came through the light. I renamed it Twinlineal, and it is the secret to how you get your justice back. And if you don't get that, you're missing it. And I know some of us don't get it because, we think that, we're down now and we're finished and blah, blah, blah. Not hardly. So Ausar is purity. And in my case, I'm no Ausar. I'm no pure spirit. But I spent 15 months polishing my spiritual mirror on retreats for 5 years. I've been given this before. And that polished me up enough, along with a lifetime of battles for just societies, that God, for whatever reason, shared this light with me. And that's the key to the book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. So Ausar is a pure one, as the Kun describe themselves as pure ones, but of great moral purity. I'm not. I'm working on mine. I got a lot of stuff to work on. This man was a high order human being. George Washington Carver was a high order human being, and there are others like him. And because he was such a high order, he was piping in, thinking God's thoughts all the time. He had so many inventions, you can't count them. You know what I mean? So, because the Kun was the first people coming from heaven to earth, and they were people of pure character, they could pipe in to the highest forces, the force of God. They had the best definitions of God, infinite force outside of space and time, a part of which God distributes to everything God creates, which quantum physics would agree with, except they take God out of it. Not understanding what that force is. If you understand it's a good force, you're not going to create nuclear weapons. You're not going to create a mad, mutual assured destruction strategy that is based on wiping out the planet. You're going to use that force with care, kindness, and to help nature and humanity as guardians. So Ausar had this quality. When sacrifices were made to Ausar, now a lot of you are not into sacrifices. You've come out of the book, the various religions and stuff. Though one reason why Blacks embraced Christianity is at the end of slavery, not during slavery, was because they had to make a choice of some kind. They needed a place where they could meet and have protection, and a church would be that. But they needed to continue to practice what they were doing on the plantation, which was voodoo. And that's what they dropped in the black church. Pierre made the point last week or 2 weeks, last week, that voodoo means spirit. It actually means God, And if you look at the essence of the black church, it's about raising the spirit. That's what it's about. So in Kemet, the priest who operated in temples, they would do cult work or cult worship, not as cult as you following blindly someone, but as cult as to cultivate. So if they were to deal with Ausar, they would have a statue of Ausar. Inside of it would be a part of the spirit of Ausar. They would cultivate it, water it, pray to it, do various things, And so when they made sacrifices to a particular entity, a statue or whatever that had a spirit in it, they would make appropriate sacrifices. And so this is from the book of Coming Forth by Day. This is how Ausar was worshipped and the kind of sacrificial offerings given to Ausar. This is what the book of Coming Forth by Day says. All things good and pure, which are presented to my God of my city in the great castle of the black one right there, Ausar. You can see he's black. So what they're doing is, for the pure one, they're making pure offerings. Now, you call this religion. I pointed this out before. In African languages, there's no word for religion. No word. Religio means binding together Christianity with former spirit beliefs that Christians falsely called paganism, which was the Roman beliefs. And because they had these other practices that they put into the form of saints, you found that wherever you have Catholicism in the Caribbean or the US or South America or anywhere in the world, you will see what's called voodoo in a near pure form. And so in Haiti, they would hide their Lao, which is called the Orishas, Orisha, or netters in Kemet, which are spirit beings that could be like Ausar, a human being that becomes a god, but not the god. Or it could be spirits that came to earth that have never been human before. And so under Catholicism, they could hide these African spirits. And so you could have a pure form of that. That's what you had in Louisiana. But in the Protestant system, what you had to do was get to the essence of it. And so the diviners were the ones, and the Obia, men and women, who were the spirit people in the Protestant countries. And that's what the African American dropped into the black church. So how was worship conducted? It was conducted through prayer. It was conducted through singing. It was conducted through drumming in public, because inside the temple, the priest would do their own work to cultivate the particular statue, to nourish the spirit inside the statue. But once or twice a year, they would bring that being out for the community to celebrate. What is that called? All over Africa. And it is the form of worship in the black church, which you say we lost all our spirituality. It's called praise worship. And why is praise worship central to worship? Because when you praise through singing, dancing, drumming, and, a group of people praying in praise, then you capture the attention of the spirit. And so when blacks come out of slavery and they're trying to get blacks to get away from the voodoo that they were practicing, the blacks refused. They said no, because, and these were blacks from the AME church, these were white missionaries and stuff like that. They said no, because if we do that, we can't contact God. So that's what the black psychologists would call the voodoo in your IQ. And some of us get crazy when you say voodoo. It's nothing but God, baby. You know what I mean? Huh? So this was the nature of contact with the spirit. But it was through giving the pure spirit what was good. And the best prayer for any African or any person is good character. That's the best prayer. It's helping others. Or as in Medu Neter script, they say, providing a boat to the boatless, food for the hungry, and a roof for those that have no place to sleep. That's the highest service that you can perform. That's the greatest praise that you can offer. And by the way, in Yoruba, they call this oriki, praise prose. So when a mother sees a child and they've been away from the child for a long time, she begins to sing the praise of her child. My son who has done this, that, and the other. My mother did that. I never did it, but if I really wanted to impress a lady before I was married, the best thing for me would have been to bring her to my mother, because she would just praise me to high heaven. And my mother knew me inside out. She knew I wasn't perfect, but that's the nature of the culture. It's in you, baby. You know what I mean? And that's what you should be doing with the people you love. Praise them. You hear me? Praise them. Not just for the God that's within them, but all the qualities that they have, all the good things that they do. Let them know you appreciate that. That's real love. Now, Ausar is also known, and again, this is explaining the connection of Ausar to Pharaonic and kingly leadership. He is described in the book of Coming Forth by Day as, quote, inheriting the staff of the Lord of Life, a cane or a staff. Now I go to my great teacher, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, his greatest work, Medu Neter. He has many works. Jake was a master of brevity. He said things in very short books or even speeches, you know. Brevity was his thing. He told me that when he was going for his master's, and he was a political scientist, the person that was going to read it refused to read it because it was too short. And Jake is very stubborn. He refused to add anything to it. And so I guess it took a year before the guy read it. And then he finally approved it. That was Jake. So this book is a little over 100 pages long. It's profound. So Jake is describing what the staff of authority meant that is associated with Ausar, which is called the staff of the Lord of Life. So what he says is there's a origin for certain words. In linguistics, it's called etymology, the origin of a word, the meaning of a word. And so he explains the origin of the word Medu, M-E-D-E-W, which was written M-D-W. We don't really know how the Kemites actually spoke it, so vowels have been added to it. So Medu. Medu in Kemet means speech. But the root of this word, according to Dr. Carruthers, and he was a reader of Medu Neter, one of the two best people on ancient Kemet after Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop died, that was him and Theophil Obenga. And then after that, it's Theophil Obenga on dynastic Kemet. And so he makes the point that the etymology or root meaning of the word MDW means staff or cane, as in staff of old age. Uh-oh. So this is a word that on one level means speech. And this man here, Ausar, had to be a person of pure speech, not just good. So speech is being associated with authority or authoritative utterance. So writing is speech, with a pen or however you write it. And the elder's cane is the symbol of the staff of authority that derives from what, to quote Dr. Carruthers, arises from, quote, the potent word. And I would add to that the word that has vital force, power. And in Kemet, it would be considered also magical power, healing power. So as Dr. Carruthers goes on, he explains in the narrow sense, Meru Neter referred to the written language of Kemet, of Egypt. And that was invented by the Anu before Ausar. Now, he shows that there's an association between the written word and the spoken word. Of course, the spoken word is, the source of the word itself. And then that word spoken, whether silently or verbally, gets later when writing's invented, put into writing. But the key thing about the word in Africa is that even in societies like Kemet, where you have a written system, the oral takes precedence over the written. The Bambara tell us the main reason, because it contains force or power based on whether or not it adheres to the truth. If it is real truth, then the force of the spoken word is most powerful. And written things or written words that are based on the truth derive their power from the truth, but they especially derive their power from imitating speech, which Dr. Carruthers describes as a walking, talking, doing speech. That is the same speech of a holiness preacher or any Black person who is putting their whole self into what they're saying, or any saxophone player like John Coltrane, who was reproducing through his instrument the speech of a preacher. He said the only way he could move an audience was to do that. And of all the forces of speech, those that are musical are of the highest order. And you will note that in the Yoruba, for example, when the Babalawo, who is the father of mysteries, the priest, mine is Ifeyemi, who's an Araba, second highest in the Ifa system, when they speak, they often sing when they speak. And that, of course, is why in the Black tradition, you have King, who has this sing-song tradition that comes out of the African tradition. And then you have a special speech in the Black church that is actually an African language. And that language is even more beautiful than the sing-song speech of a king or others that I have heard. And that is an African speech pattern adapted to our reality through our Niger-Congo speech patterns that we have. But even those that don't speak the Niger-Congo speech patterns, and most do, which we call Ebonics, that sing-song thing is there. And they say, Ausar sang. His words were kind, comforting, and he converted people to civilization that way, So Dr. Carruthers makes the point that therefore speech for African people, and this is New African as well, conveys ontology, ontology, which means, what does it mean to be human? It conveys that. When you run around talking about, oh, slavery destroyed our humanity. Hell, if it did, you got more humanity than most people need or ever thought of having. That is the core of African culture. And it is the essence of this figure here, Ausar. I pointed out before, you can lose 90% of yours and still have more than every people on the planet other than Native Americans. You hear me? Humanism is at the core of your being. It's in your DNA. It's in your cellular memory. It's in your cultural core. Kindness. Blacks survived without an acre or a mule by helping each other through kindness. You hear me? So speech, which the staff of authority signifies, speaks to origin, what it means to be human. And speech speaks to metaphysics, which is the origin of thought and things like that on the spirit plane. So this is the basis for what the Dogon call deep knowledge, Dr. Carruthers calls deep thought, and most people call philosophy, all of which is spirit-based. And this is the key thing to understand about Ausar and everything else. As intermediary, he is an intermediary contacting the spirits and based on his good character. And when you have a Babalawo who is good, a priest who's good, then that person, their skills are based on training, but they're based on good character. And they're able to do things, see things that you normally could not see. So speech, therefore, is profound. And it is through speech that we convey our thoughts and everything else. So on the deepest level, Medu Neter, Medewnettcher, is God's speech. It's the speech of God. And Africans believe, most people believe, that God is the source of speech, the source of life. And therefore, our ability to speak comes from God, but that is called Medu Neter, Medewnefer, which means human speech, good speech that tries to approximate God. And so you'll see in African linguistics and African speakers, you don't hear cursing. You don't hear cursing because the power of speech is its purity. And defiling it with curse words, weakens you. And then defiling it with negative words, the N word that I don't allow on this show. But it's not enough to prohibit a word. It's to prohibit the thought pattern. You got to be thinking African. You got to be thinking roots, not this negative stuff that a lot of us want to pass on as some great legacy, So this is the power of speech, and therefore the staff of authority that Ausar is associated with is an expression of his wisdom and is conveyed through his speech. So Ausar is the man who became God, both as Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the person who's also a god. But in the higher sense, as he passes on to the next life, he's put on the highest plane of the Netters, or the sacred principles, or the Orishas in the Yoruba system. He's on the highest level because of his good character, his wisdom, the fact that it's from his ancestors, the Anu, and him and those that follow him, that Kemetic civilization is based. And so this description that I'm going to give you of Asar is the most beautiful. And it again speaks to why Asar is considered to be the divine ancestor. And the model for a human being, which I pointed out before in Kemetic thought is called Geruma, Gerumaa, which is self-mastered person, a person who masters the forces inside of him. The Jeremiah person was not talkative. They were often quiet. When they had something to say, then they really had something to say. And I pointed out before, among the Bambara, that person is called Ma, M-A-A. You can often understand more about Kemetic thought when you find an equivalent in other African thought systems that are still alive. And the Babar are an example of that. And so they give an even better description of what the ideal person is, a person who is in harmony with the forces within them. So this is the description of Asar that I think is the most beautiful, describing a model human being. And I might say that at a time when African families and communities are in disarray due to powerful forces that have hit us, that have produced what I call a choice between two cultures. I discuss it in the integration track. Those words come from God, another experience with the light. For us to get out of the mess we're in, we're going to have to draw from the best of our culture, both African and New African or African Caribbean, whatever your base is, combined with programs to do healing work for our people. Because as a result of movements of the 60s, the Black Power, Black freedom movements of the 60s and 70s, the Pan-Africanist movements, Afrocentric movements, the system came back on us heavy-handed. That's the nature of war. And so to recover, to heal generation gaps and stuff like that, we got to go black to the future, go back to the positive aspects, both of our ancient culture, but of New Africa, both, and use it as a part of revitalizing families and communities. And I should say the twin lineal model is the key. We'll talk about that in depth later, but I've talked about it to some extent before. So this is their description of Asar, which is a beautiful description of Asar. It is one that is an expression of his vital force and why he became a god on earth for human beings, particularly in pre-dynastic or the ancient time and dynastic time. Now, my book, The Art of Leadership, I stress the fact that leaders need to work on being embodiments of truth and trying to be incorruptible. And we've had some who are. They must have good character. They must understand that they are expressions of the will of their people. King said, I didn't invent the Montgomery bus boycott. When the people called on me, I stepped forward as a spokesperson for my people. King wasn't perfect. He had his shortcomings, but he learned from his mistakes and he was a good conduit for the just will of his people. So this is a key quality. So this is the most beautiful description I've seen of Pharaonic or kingly qualities, or qualities that need, because we're no longer in a period where we're going to have kings. You know, we need to take the best of these systems and adapt them. This is the beautiful description of this greatest of great ones. They said in the Book of Coming Forth by Day, Asar is, quote, we can never be this first one, but we can try, be the best we can. It says, Ausar is the perfect one, the clever one, whose speech is beautiful. With a true heart, who listens quietly without being cross, meaning angry. This is useful for the heart of a king, he who leads the two lands. Let me say that again. Ausar's character was described as the perfect one, the clever one, whose speech is beautiful, with a true heart, who listens quietly without being cross or angry. This is useful for the heart of a king, he who leads the two lands. One of the key qualities in leadership is that people who are disturbed can be angry. People who are disturbed can have issues, as they should. Good leadership listens. Good leadership keeps their mouth shut and lets the people express their will. That's good leadership. And in an era where you need leaderful, where a whole lot of people are leaders, that's what good leadership is, because they're coming from the people. And so you let a person speak. And of course, in ancient Kemet, that was the case with the eloquent peasant who is coming after a period of discord and oppression. And the pharaohs are now learning, because some of them had become corrupt in the first intermediate period from the 5th down to the beginning of the 10th dynasty, or the end of the 9th dynasty. And so they had begun to get off their high throne and listen. And they were telling their children, one of whom would succeed them, to do the same thing. So this quality here of listening, because that's the way we learn. I value the comments section here. I wish that this was a thing where we could have a verbal interchange, which is our way, but it's the next best thing. That's why I do these shows live. And hopefully sometimes I get some light where somebody's got something where you really learn from it, or they ask deep questions. And deep questions are often very basic. So the perfect one, the one who's a pure spirit. The clever one. The clever one means intelligent, wise. And it also suggests that this is the one who can resolve problems. This is the one who's practical in their solutions. True of heart. In Kemet, the heart is described, the hati is the heart mind. That is where wisdom resides. It's both the intellectual side and it's the intuitive side. It's the combination of both. And it resides in the ka, but it's the hati, the heart mind. That is what is weighed at judgment. Not being angry and listening is someone who is a person at peace with themselves and doesn't take things personally. This is a self-mastered person. So these are qualities needed to rule the two lands. All pharaohs didn't have these qualities. Some aspired to them. Those that did were loved by the people. Now, Ausar became the symbol of eternal life and the judge of the afterlife. And we know the story that his brother Set said to have cut him up into parts, and his wife Isis, Set, was able to put every part together except the sexual part, meaning that he was put together spiritually and was restored to a rebirth, to a new life in the spirit world, and was symbolic of everlasting life, and was the judge for those who had passed to that realm. And pharaohs, in the beginning, the first dynasty, I don't know what the case was in ancient Kemet, actually claimed sole monopoly of eternal life, which was a joke. And when rebellion broke out in the 5th dynasty over oppression, one of the things that people fought for was recognizing that the recognition that they had eternal life. How can you take eternal life from someone? You know. So let me just show you. This is the processional cycle that we have based the analysis of the procession of the equinoxes. The Chwa, which we discussed in the show 2 weeks ago, who are the Anu as they move into the Nile Valley and are the foundation of Kemetic creativity, humanity, civilization. And of course, this is the map of Kemet showing you upper and lower Kemet. And the area there you see Nubia was a part of the Anu civilization, both lower, and you note lower is upper because of the way you come down in the Nile, and upper is lower geographically. And this is what we covered last week, showing you how precession worked, the Earth spinning on, spinning in relationship to the zodiac, and one complete spin, 26,000 years. And each cycle of it going through a sign, you know, but backwards. That's why it's called precessional. Now, when you have the Anu, they are ruling two lands, and Ausar wears the two crowns. But what you'll see with the figure that's on the top, the very top, that is the last of the Anu pharaoh, Scorpion. And you can see he's African. And he's the last one to follow the Set people. The person in the middle is Menes, the first pharaoh of the first dynasty. You will note that they're both African. One is a little person, the other one is a larger person. But the point is that there is a struggle that occurs towards the end of Anu rule between the people of Set and the people of Horus, and the people in the middle went out. And that's dynasty Kemet, but they're black. Now, this is some of the pottery discovered at Kutzel, which is a site in Nubia about 300 to 400 years before 3100 BC. Now, this pottery is very similar to the pottery that I showed you 2 weeks ago of the Anu period. Very similar, including the ones that's decorated. But the shapes are the same as going back 9,500 BC. Except 9,500 BC didn't have any artistic design, as some of these don't here. Same shape, though. Now, to the right, what you're seeing is some of the animals of ancient Kemet. Now, by dynastic times, those animals are gone, you know. I showed you 2 weeks ago slides of the animals in ancient Kemet, the same pictures. So what you're seeing with the finds in Kutzel is the same work that you find in the cave, so-called art, which this is spirit art here. It's really not art, but that's what we call it, that has the power to attract forces. All African traditional systems are like that. So this is the same as you'll find 9,500 BC. Now, this is the great find at Kutzel, a couple of hundred years before the dynasty of Menes. And you'll see on my left, probably your left, one that has a pharaoh's crown. And over his head is a bird. Now, this is telling you something. Most scholars who have read this don't see any point in making this distinction. But the people, and this is a find made in Nubia, The people of Kutsul were Nubians, and originally Nubia was a part of Anu civilization. And they were Set people. So you saw the bird that is on the cover of this book, the one where you see the ears on the side there. That was the symbol for Pharaoh. But dynastic Kemet, it's Horus. And this period here in Nubia, it's Horus also. That's Horus over the head or in front of the Pharaoh. So what this means is there's been a transformation where you have the presence of Horus African people among the Set people. And so this is where the struggle really comes from. So the picture of Scorpion is defeated as the last of the Set dynasties by the Horus people. Now this was a pharaoh of the second dynasty. These are pharaohs of the various dynasties of Kemet. And you'll see the figure of this pharaoh. Look at the nose. In most cases, these noses get chopped off. But in this case, for some reason, they missed this one. So this is a pharaoh in the second dynasty of Kemet. And then here, we have another pharaoh of the early dynasties. He's Nubian. And then we have another pharaoh of an early dynasty. You see where they knocked the nose off, but it's very hard. This one is pharaoh from the 12th dynasty. And then we have here King Amenemhet of the third. And the fourth. And then you have the great pharaoh Akhenaten, who you can see from the profile is clearly African, clearly black. And Queen Tai, chief queen of Amenhotep III. See, she's black. And then you have here the pharaoh Senusret, who the Greeks called Sesostris, Sesostris. This was not such a nice pharaoh. Some of y'all don't like to hear this. This one is the one who required the closing of all the temples to build his pyramid. And, closing temples in Kemet would be like closing a bank or banks, because that's a place where you go and pray and everything else. Plus, a lot of people are being put to work. They're not slaves or anything building these pyramids. This is a period of history that some of us don't like to talk about. But I'm a revolutionary, so. This is King Amenemhet II, and you can see he's imitating the Sphinx. And this is King Menenhotep III right here, and you can see that nose. African. They didn't knock that nose off. I don't know how they missed it. So these are some of the early pharaohs, but they're drawing from these traditions that I've just described. Now, this is worshiping to Ausar through the symbol of eternal life, pushing the sun, and the Djed column that represents ascension to heaven. And so this is Aset and Nephthys, Aset wearing the crown of the pharaoh, which is the chair of the pharaoh, showing that she's the source of authority. This is the entry of the person who's leaving this life to the next life. And Anubis, the jackal, is preparing the scales of judgment. And Tehuti, who is to my right side, has got the record, which in parapsychology would be in your ka, you know. And you have many people pleading that their ka say good things for them. The ka is going to say whatever you did. If it was good, fine. And then on the top are the 42 assessors, the ones that you pass when you are saying, I did not lie, the negative confessions. And by the way, that's why it's not really correct to call these laws, because these are spirit systems. These are truths residing inside of you. So you're testifying by saying you didn't do, you know, you didn't lie, you told the truth, and so forth, you know. And this is where the person has been weighed, the one who's in white, and he's coming before Ausar and his two sisters, Nephthys and Aset behind them. And he's been judged just, and he can enter the afterlife and have a seat with the gods. So this is the most important thing about Ausar, is that he represented eternal life. He presided over judgment. And it is these notions that have been inherited by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and taken into different directions. But this idea of eternal life, the idea of judgment, the idea of the 42 confessions, out of which the 10 commandments come, and a whole lot of other things. But what the Kemites are practicing here is not religion. And they have no need to put a God in check with a whole lot of rules and stuff as the Hebrews did. These are truths that rise from within. So this has been on the Anu, and particularly the great one, Anu Ausar, whose priesthood is the oldest in Kemet. And it has been covering the qualities of Ausar that were central to Pharaonic system, and that was also central to Kemetic life. And so, in conclusion, I think it's very important to draw from your past the best. And truth is what we should live by. As the ancient teachings said, it is the food that nourishes Ausar. It is the truth that nourishes God. It is the truth that nourishes each one of us. And we're living in a society today that it rests its education, rests its organization of society on facts that have been arranged to say whatever the people in power want them to say. The educational systems are not set up to orient people to truth. The first truth is to know yourself, and then to love yourself. And then by knowing yourself and loving yourself, to pursue a path in life of self-knowledge as the basis for all knowledge, and to try and be yourself in the world by adhering to the truth. And so this idea of Ma'at, practiced daily by the Kemites, set up, or by the Twa, set up as the ideal for Kemetic civilization and other African civilization, and the basic truth that our parents teach our children, most of them, and that which will sustain us, which is the key to wisdom. So the notion of Ausar being a pure one, we may not be pure ones, but we can work on purifying our characters as we're working in struggles to free our minds and to support struggles to liberate our people. I hope as many people as possible who watch this show are engaged in some positive forward movement in their community and aren't just sitting back intellectualizing on stuff and not doing anything to change your condition. So we can draw from our past, restore historical memory, and as we plunge into a deeper knowledge of ourselves, we gain a sense of our identity, our purpose, and our direction. The sixfold stages to mental freedom is really the basis for that. And we hope as soon as we have 40 people signed up, we will be starting a year-long webinar on that. But it will only work when the people who are in it are applying it to work that they're doing in the community. Fighting homelessness, fighting poverty, fighting the abuse that our people face from the system and from some of us who have internalized ISFET, I-S-F-E-T, or wrongdoing. So there's much that we can draw from our past, and as we do it, it nourishes us. Hotep, I hope people got something out of this. So let's see if people have any comments or questions. Aloud to Zoo, why did Bantu people need to be civilized by the Twa when they came from them? Did the Twa abandon those that came from them? I made this point before. I did one show was on African ancestral power and how the primordial Twa civilized the Bantu people. This came from the Bantu people. They're saying that, because these are the taller Africans, they're saying that when they first emerge and they're migrating into the Niger-Congo region, they seek out the Twa to learn how to behave, because while they were living in some ways that were just, they were peaceful, women had more say-so than men. They were in the early stages of agriculture, but they didn't know how to make fire, how to cook meat, and they didn't know the first thing about sexual relationships. So the Twa I pointed out to you before had to teach them not to engage in incest, teach them how to cook meat, teach them how to make iron, which was necessary for hunting and for agricultural activities. And so they said the primordial Twa were their guides and teach them how to purify themselves so that they could contact the spirits of the earth. So I think that some people who moved into the Nile Valley were the same. And so when Ausar is noted as the person who took people from the wild state and civilized them, he's not referring to Twa, because the Twa didn't have to be civilized. So this is the state of early humanity, you know. They were not the first people. So they needed to be civilized. They had some goodness in them. They had that balance that they had inherited from the Twa, male-female balance. But they were in a wild state otherwise. And the Twa were the masters. They're the masters of character as well as civilization. So they needed it. You know what I mean? We need it now. Huh? Oh yeah, you know. Okay. M. Jewel says solving the problem of your people, not being trained to solve the issues of others who mean one no good. Yes. But interestingly enough, you're going to find out you're correct that, first of all, in however we're trained, whether it's in the education, the self education, the work we do in the community, or whatever, the first thing is to um, tend to your own pond. I have a saying, it's a poor frog that won't praise its own pond. And ponds are muddy, but I don't care how muddy the waters are, people like their own pond. So you got to tend to your own pond so you can catch some fish. You know what I mean? So you can live. Your own pond is a metaphor for your own people, you know? So first you tend to them. But guess what? When you get into societal change, you're going to find out that the things you have to do to produce change that will improve your life are also going to impact the lives of others. I've learned this through struggle. But that formula of just societies where all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. The reason why society is oppressive is because powers are the hands of too few people and they can do whatever they want and they're grabbing everything up. They're heating the planet up. They're causing floods, all kinds of disasters. They don't care 2 cents about people starving. So do that. Understand that the balance, the basis for just societies arise from that balance. So it means not just you. You're going to change society. I've been in movements that teach me that. Okay, the question here is the chat, the information for, it's right here. Okay, the subscribing. Let's see. Donate to the Dr. Obertashaka Show. Cash App. Dr. Obertashaka Show. And we've had some problems. I know some of you are regular donors, and we still have to figure out the use of this. So some of you, if your money's come back, put it back in. We should, in a few days, have this mastered, you know, because I appreciate the donations. It's helping me offset expenses. So that's right there. If you look there, it shows you how to click on. Alan Harrison is signifying on the Chua. Yeah, very important. Foundation is always important, you know. Yeah, Brother Ogawa is pointing out that it would be nice if people could make a monthly donation if it's $20, you know. If we got enough, that'll help us cover the basic thing. You'll note I don't have ads here, you know. There's a reason for that. And that's because I'm anti-corporate. I've been fighting the corporations all my life. So, yeah. So I would rather not have to go the corporate route. And the way you can save us is to give us enough so that we can finance the show. I put a lot of money into it. You can't keep doing that. Okay. Ayadella. Yeah, well, like to sit at my feet. I like to sit at yours too. I'm here to learn. So whatever, contact me, and my email address is there, otashaka@sbcglobal.net. ETA Brown Heron. The division in these civilizations is it due to humans and for power hungry for leadership? Okay. It's also saying the Cash App did go through. Yeah, I would say that that's a key thing. There's a whole history to that. And my 9th book will go into this in detail. There's a whole history. And it is tied to the Aryan presence and what happens with that culture. Kurt Thomas, any thoughts as to why the Twa removed themselves from Kemet? That the question shows that you know something. The Twa have a saying. They say they built a civilization called Kimi, Kimi. They sailed on the oceans. They built great cities, and then later they tired of it. And some said they were not happy with the exercise of power. And so they moved back to a more simple state of life. That may be part of it. And it may be also that they were pushed out by these bigger Africans who are the dynastic Africans. That's clearly what happened. So that may be part of it too. Seba Haru Kashanaga. I've been on the path of Mott since I was in the U.S. Army. Good. It's constant work. Coco, thank you. We should be building African-centered training institutes for our people. Yeah, correct. And among other things, leadership training and all other kinds. And that's what I set up per Ankh, Amilcar Cabral, Ella Baker House of Life Institute. And that's part of what the sixfold stages to mental freedom training will be based on. Gerard, I here see the references of the Twa as Ani or Anu. Any correlation or reference to Anunnaki? I don't know. Explain in your comment who they are. Okay. If there's any other. M. Jewel, so interesting. They knocked off noses, but couldn't do anything about the other features, would still show others who the Kemites were. Yeah, obviously, you know. Yeah. Lao Tzu, I'm in the 2nd chapter of the Integration Trap Generation Gap. Question, why is it that the people who were derived from the Twa outside of African societies deviated? The first thing I would say is most did not for a long period of time. In other words, most of the Africans who moved outside of Kemet continued these same practices for a long period of time. And then I've noted that the presence of the Aryan represents the first disruption, though it didn't impact Africa for a long time. But that's really where the first disruption occurred. It didn't come from within the culture, you know. Oh, Tianja Bean, greetings from the island country of Bermuda. Greetings to you. Right on. Chad Jomo Kenyatta. Is the African language like when Frederick Douglass imitated sounds of nature? No. We have some people who have done some serious research on African American, African Caribbean, but specifically African American linguistics. And that it shows that basically 80% of Blacks in the US speak a Niger Bantu Congo linguistic language, which is, some people call it Ebonics. And in the Caribbean, it's even more pronounced because they're living in virtually all Black societies. So they're using it all the time. And so you may have African Americans who use it when among each other, but not in the presence of whites, or not as much. So it's based on those speech patterns, vowel patterns, and everything else. Lao Tzu. Is the praising of her son by a mother a part of tradition of African culture, or is this also found in European society? I don't find it as a central feature of European societies, and it's a central feature of African because, in part, it derives from the whole worship traditions of Africans, and we all ourselves are divinities, and it also stems from a humanistic culture and a culture of love. So I haven't found it as a central feature in European society. And given the division between males and females, it would be found least among the way in which males interact with females. A whole lot less praise or respect, because there's a commodification of the female under patriarchy, treating them as objects and despising them. In not all cases, but it's central to that culture. You know? Chad is referring to somebody's father who was a good person. Imagine if here today we called our highest frequency people the pure ones. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But then you also have to be comfortable with the idea of spirit, and you have to really appreciate what it means to polish your own mirror, which is your spirit, your speech, your words, your actions, your attitudes. Work on it, and we have people who are doing that. But combine that with everything else you do. That's where the joy of life is, and draw people into your circle that are working on that as well, or help them work on it. Oh, Chad Jomo Kenyatta. A beam of light shot through the room when my father passed and the power was out. Yeah, it was his spirit passing to the next room. And it also meant he was a good spirit, you know. Okay, here is Francine Leonard, and she's referring to a king of Rwanda who helped out his own people when they came to the U.S., the Tutsis. I didn't know that's a good thing. The traditional systems do that. M. Jewell talking about the importance of elders in the community. Chad Jomo Kenyatta, did the pharaoh have more than one wife when married to the sister for having children? Yes. In fact, the wealthy often had more than one wife, not just the pharaoh. And while in Africa, polygamy is part of the culture, a lot of them didn't practice it because they couldn't afford to, you know. because there are certain obligations that a man has under polygamy. He's got to provide them with a house, put them in business, and the profits of which go to them. So everybody didn't have that. Okay. Ogawa is talking about hit the like button. That's very important. I should have said that in the beginning. Yeah, everybody watching, if you like it, say you like it, because then that increases the notice on the show, brings in more people. Wolf Menlu, he's talking about how Set was neither good or bad, even though he killed his brother. I've raised the question of whether or not the notion that Set killed his brother is a dynastic or pre-dynastic or ancient Kemetic notion, because it would be very unlikely that the Kemites would have as their symbol for Pharaoh someone who represented the murderer of the first Pharaoh. It's very unlikely. So I don't have the answer to that. I'm just saying it's something to question, you know. Lushanda, thank you. And I appreciate the work you're doing in the community. And let me know what's happening in your community. Cheryl S.G. Rush, thank you. Thank you. You know, it's what keeps me going here, you know. Lao Tzu is reading the Integration Trap. Appreciate that, Lao. Okay, let's see what we have on the bottom here. M. Jewell, Dr. Amos Wilson speaks to intellect being a matter of problem solving and not thinking one's smart from an IQ test. Yeah, but the book I'm writing on Sever deals with this, and so when it comes out, you should check it out. What's called the intellect or the analytical mind is the lower mind. It's one you need, but when it's placed in charge, and I did a program on this, you should go look at it. When the lower mind is put in charge, it's like the servant being put in charge, because it's the servant mind. It follows direction, and there's a higher mind. And so the West operates basically on this mind of reason, minus intuition, and a whole lot of other things. There's a lot to this, and my book is replacing that system. Okay, Diana Battles. Where are the Bambara geographically? They're in Mali. They're right next to Dogon country. And they also use the same table of signs system that I've discussed. Their drawings drawn in the sand. that I've discussed in some other shows. They are a people of the great Mali Empire of Sunjata. Some of them are Muslim, but they're traditionalists. And then some of them are traditionalists. Okay, there's a person here, Kwasi Shabazz Bonsu, adult leadership training retreat founded by the late Nana Ajayi Akoto, happens every June in Virginia. That's good. I found a mission. Thanks for banging me a week or so ago. Many Philadelphia schools don't have libraries. Unacceptable. Yeah, good. Edward K. The Trois appeared to be, looking at Greek stuff, appear to be the golden age. Yeah, race. I would say it's the golden age for sure, because it's a period of peace and justice and high creativity. Ayadella, they just found another mineral that is electromagnetic nickel stones rocks. A negative and positive wire attached to a wire and lamp lens lights up the lamp lens like a light bulb. Oh, interesting. Big Payback Porter. Why did the name for the king change from MWST to Pharaoh? I'm not familiar with what MWST means. Did the Kemites have electricity? Apparently not. Okay. All right. That appears to be it. I hope you got something out of this. This is for your growth. And until next week, Hotep.